Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I want to show you how I procedurally created all the shaders and textures for these lineup of shacks. And I need to have them all to be unique because we are using them in a bigger scene and I don't want to have all the different variations. So I want to make sure that they are all looking unique in my master scene. And I'm using a couple of techniques to make sure that everything is varied in terms of placement, in terms of color, in terms of scale. So everything will be adjusted. And you can see we are now inside a stack somewhere in the scene. But yeah, just zooming in here on this area, you are noticing that they're all different, which is perfect. This is what I'm after. And this is then the bigger scene. You can see they are all kind of, some are blue, some are greenish, and some are metal, some are wood, some are plastic or whatever. They're all varied. Perfect. So let me show you how I did that. So this is my lineup scene. Before we get into it, I just want to make sure that I'm cleaning things up a little, because right now the shader is, we're just working on the wall shader, but right now we probably do want to just get rid of everything except the walls quick. Let's see if we can actually do it in a quick way. Yeah, we should be able to, what's it called? We can split it, most probably. Split it by walls. And there we go. We just have the walls. So if I go back up, now we just have the walls. And if I render, we should be just dealing with these guys, which is perfect. So now I can actually go in and show you what was done to get this look. And if I head into my material network, which is in here and under walls, this is the whole network. And you can already see there's this random seed section. And then there's a basic shader here. So let me recreate everything, starting with the standard surface shader, which is the go-to shader in Arnold. You always use that because that is the Uber shader, which does pretty much everything. And if I render now, we've got gray. So the idea now is, how do we get textures? Obviously there is no UVs because I didn't feel the need to create UVs for this, because we can use Triplanar, and Triplanar is built for this. Exactly this. And you will notice on the left, I've got lots of input shaders, textures, painted metal, whatever, and they all feed into a triplanar. So let me get into it. So if I create a triplanar, it's just essentially one texture which is projected on X, Y, and Z. And let me find a nice one. Maybe, I actually don't know which one is nice. Let's go input and hook this up to, for now, just go to the surface and we can see that's the metal. I don't like that too much. So maybe try this. This will work. Concrete. All right, so this is now my triplanar projection. You can see now each of them have exactly the same projection. And as I said several times, I don't want that. So I want to make variations. So one way to vary this is by offsetting it, right? So if I move this maybe to 2 or whatever, 50, nothing happens. Maybe I need to change this guy. Why is it not updating? Maybe that's an update issue. The rotation works. I'm not sure why the offset doesn't work. Okay, so it doesn't work because I actually have figured out that it's a seamless texture and it just doesn't want to rotate and offset. But what we can use the cell instead, which is working just fine. So the cell is essentially creating clusters, which you then can rotate technically. So I can make random cells that I can offset and create these random rotations. And again, we can still play with the scale. So if you go smaller in scale, everything will be scaled up. We don't want that. So we probably want to go maybe a unit of 5 just to see what we're getting. And you can see now we're getting these cells. You can see the structure. All right. And this will make things more randomized now because I can rotate them. I can blend these clusters. Probably 5 is just too much. So we should probably just go to 2 and work with that. This will kind of work. So, but it's still now doing obviously the same pattern on everything, and we want to randomize that somehow. And the idea is to use some kind of random ID to drive all of this. And this is what's going on here. And it's all coming from this user data integer. And USID is something I made up. It's a short for unique stack ID. And when I generated these stacks, I made sure that each of these individual stacks has a unique number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15, whatever. As many I have different numbers. And based on that, if I visualize this ID, if I just connect this up, the int, to my surface, you won't see anything. But if I use the random one, which works on that integer color, so if I just create a random node and connect the output of this USID into my integer input, hook that up, we will now see we get a unique color per item. And I can use this to drive certain values on the triplanar, for example. So this gives me a random color, RGB. I can make it give me a random float. So depending on what I need, I could potentially drive maybe the scale factor. Why not, right? So the scale factor right now is a color. And we can just hook up the color and technically see what we're getting. It will probably look a little bit bizarre, but it kind of will vary the scales and stretch things. You can see now we've got longer ones here, boxy ones there, and everything is already just doing this random, except the first two, they look still very similar. But I can change the seed value, and then we've got a completely different result. You can see now, completely different. And if you want to control it a little bit, you can do grayscale, and now each XYZ component will get the same kind of scale, and it will not be stretching in one axis. And I can also do a range after that and forcing it to be a certain min and maximum scale. So let's use the output, hook that up to scale. Nothing will change because we're not changing our outputs. But now let's say we want it to be 1. So everything should now get back to the same scale because we are not doing any variations. But let's say we want a maximum of 0.75 for our minimum scale, and our maximum scale can be maybe 2.5. And now some are very high frequency and some should be a little bit lower frequency, potentially these guys here. So this already works, and we can use a similar idea now to drive the rotation of the cells potentially. So now based on the cells, if I enable cell, should now see we get random rotations. And again, we can change the amount randomly if we feel like it. You can see everything is being rotated in the same way because it's right now doing the same thing. But I could do another random, make it grayscale, change the seed, so it's different for this kind of thing that we're trying to do. And we definitely do want to change it, like clamp the input outputs, because we don't want to have it rotate that much. So I'm hooking up the cell rotate to my range output, and I'm just saying, okay, you will maximum will be maybe minus 0.5, and your output max will be 0.5. So that's my rotation range. So you can already see now it's very random. It's obviously probably too much, so maybe you could just go 0.1. So they're more straight. You can probably go even less. So that's a way. And now you might think, okay, I have now so many input textures. I will obviously not replicate all of that, but I have this switch RGBA. I'll showcase what that is doing. So if I do another switch RGBA, and I hook up my color to my input 0, and I hook the output back to my surface, nothing changes, expected. And then I'll pick another triplanar from one of these guys and hook that up here. Right, still nothing changes because our index is still on 0. If I change my index to 1, the textures are swapped. All right, that should give you a clue what I'm after. So technically now I'm doing the same thing using the USID, a random, which will drive my index. So if I drag this random with alt drag, I make a copy of and keep the connections. this will now create a random grayscale value between 0 and 1. Depending on how many textures I have, in my FileX result, I've got 7 textures. In this case, I got just 2. So I want to create a range, hook it up, and I want to be 0 or 1. I think if you hook up a float to an integer, it will round it down, I think. So what you can do instead, to be sure what's going on, you can use a float. Was it float to integer? I believe so. Float to integer. And then you have a couple of options here. So if I hook this up now to my index, and it's set to round. So when it's 0.6, it will be 1. If it's 0.5, it will be 1, I think. If it's 0.4, if it's 0.49, it will be 0. So it should be now 50-50 roughly, the swap. If I've got more textures, I would increase my output to 2. So this will, now obviously you can see I don't have these textures, that's why it's black. But that is the idea. So the more textures I have, the bigger I make my output max, and that's exactly what's going on here. I've got the same float to int, and my range goes up to 6, and then it's swapping between those textures, right? It's pretty straightforward once you know how to do it. If I hook up my output of this guy, you can now see these are my random textures. And whenever the USID changes, so if I make thousands of copies of this, each unique copy will get a different USID. Based on that, it will get a random orientation, random texture, random scale, all of that happens. And then for this section here, for the bump and the rest, honestly, I just use the diffuse color. You can see I'm all going from the switch, and I'm using a range and color correct it slightly to create me a roughness map, which will look like this. It's based on the input texture. So this is my roughness map, very basic and similar to the bump. I'm actually just feeding the diffuse to the bump to just get some breakup. And if I visualize the shader, this is then in the end how it looks like. And you can see if I zoom in a little bit, where's my spec? Maybe here's a little bit. You will see that we do have pretty cool details. There's like a bump going on. And I used a color jitter actually based on the same, this is just using object ID, something different, but very similar, creating me a random mask. And based on that, I'm just color shifting them as well. So it's not just a different texture, it's also a different hue and a different saturation per ID. You can see if I crank up saturation, this is obviously exaggerated, but it will create me random colors for all of these stacks. And it's a pretty cool setup, to be honest. And if we go down now to our render section, go down till here, we should hopefully now see our buildings scattered again. And you can now see that pretty much every building here is unique. Like, obviously the color is now completely oversaturated, but you'll notice that they're all pretty much random. There's like a dark red here, green and blue, and they're all different based on where they are in space. So it's pretty rad, the setup. So everything is unique, and that allows me to make very sophisticated looking scenes quite easily. So I hope this gave you some insights on how to do the procedural shading. Obviously, I do very similar techniques to get the antennas or the cables, or everything else is based on this USID to break up the shapes and make things a lot more interesting.